In a small, quiet village surrounded by dense forests and rolling hills, life moved at a slow and predictable pace. The villagers went about their routines, tending to their farms, gathering at the local market, and attending church on Sundays. Among them lived a man named Thomas who had always been considered an oddball. He was known for his peculiar habits, walking alone at night muttering to himself and spending hours poring over old books in his dimly lit home. But what truly set him apart was the way he spoke about his mother, Margaret. She had passed, away 5 years ago, leaving behind memories of warmth and kindness that still lingered in the hearts of those who knew her. Yet for Thomas, something felt incomplete. Margaret had been a beloved figure in the village, a woman who always had a kind word or a helping hand for anyone in need. Her sudden death from an illness had come as a shock to everyone. At the time, Thomas had accepted it as fate, burying his grief deep within himself. But lately he couldn't shake off a growing sense of unease. It started with dreams, vivid, unsettling dreams where Margaret appeared to him, whispering things he couldn't quite understand. Then came the strange coincidences. Objects moving on their own in his house, shadows flickering where there should have been none, and a persistent feeling of being watched. Each incident gnawed at him, planting seeds of doubt about the circumstances surrounding his mother's passing. Thomas tried to ignore these feelings at first, chalking them up to stress or exhaustion. But the more he thought about it, the more convinced he became that something wasn't right. He began revisiting memories of his mother's final days, piecing together fragments of conversations and events that now seemed suspicious. There were moments when she had spoken cryptically, hinting at secrets she couldn't reveal. Once she had even mentioned feeling like she was part of something bigger than herself, though she never elaborated. These recollections haunted Thomas, fueling his growing obsession with uncovering the truth. One evening, after weeks of sleepless nights and restless pacing, Thomas made a decision that would leave the entire village speechless. He marched into the local priest's office, his face pale but determined. "I want to dig up my mother's grave," he declared without preamble. The priest, Father O'Connell, stared at him in disbelief. "What are you saying, Thomas? That's sacrilegious. Why would you even think such a thing?" Thomas clenched his fists, trying to steady his voice. "Because I need answers. Something isn't right, Father. I can feel it. If I don't do this, I'll never know the truth." Word of Thomas's request spread quickly through the village, sparking outrage and disbelief. Villagers gathered in hushed groups, discussing the matter with a mix of horror and fascination. Some dismissed him as a grieving son losing touch with reality, while others whispered that he might be hiding some dark secret. Digging up graves was not only disrespectful but also illegal without proper authorization. The idea of disturbing the dead sent shivers down people's spines. Despite the backlash, Thomas refused to back down. He visited the town hall, pleaded his case to local authorities, and even hired a lawyer to help him navigate the legal hurdles. His persistence paid off when, after weeks of fighting, he finally secured permission from the court, but only under strict supervision. On the day of the exhumation, the atmosphere in the cemetery was tense. A crowd of villagers gathered, drawn by morbid curiosity despite their discomfort. Some held rosaries, praying silently, while others stood with crossed arms, glaring at Thomas as if blaming him for desecrating sacred ground. Officials arrived to oversee the process, ensuring everything was done according to protocol. As workers began digging, the sound of shovels hitting dirt echoed eerily in the cold air. Thomas stood nearby, his expression unreadable, though his hands trembled slightly. When the coffin was finally unearthed, a collective gasp rippled through the crowd. The wooden box looked fragile, its surface cracked and discolored from years underground. Carefully, the workers pried open the lid, revealing what lay inside. What they saw left everyone stunned. Margaret's body was perfectly preserved, almost lifelike, as if she had simply fallen asleep. Her skin retained a faint glow, and her features were serene, untouched by decay. There was no foul smell, no signs of decomposition, nothing one would expect from someone buried for half a decade. Murmurs erupted among the spectators, ranging from awe to fear. Some stepped forward to get a closer look, while others retreated, making the sign of the cross. But the shock didn't end there. Tucked beside Margaret's body in the coffin was a small leather-bound journal, damp but intact. Thomas reached out hesitantly, picking it up with trembling hands. His heart raced as he recognized his mother's handwriting on the cover. Flipping through the pages, he saw entries dated just days before her death. The words hinted at a story far stranger and darker than anyone could have imagined. Margaret wrote about strange occurrences leading up to her illness. Visions of shadowy figures, whispers echoing in empty rooms, and an overwhelming sense of dread. She described feeling manipulated, as though someone close to her knew more than they let on. Most chillingly, she alluded to experiments involving ancient rituals meant to preserve life beyond death. As the crowd dispersed, murmuring amongst themselves, Thomas retreated to his home with the journal clutched tightly in his hands. Over the next few days, he immersed himself in its contents, reading every entry with growing horror. Margaret's words painted a picture of betrayal and manipulation, suggesting that she had unknowingly become part of something sinister. She mentioned a wealthy benefactor in the village who funded research into forbidden practices, using unsuspecting individuals as test subjects. Though she hadn't understood the full scope of what was happening, her instincts told her something was terribly wrong. The journal ended abruptly with a cryptic warning: "If you're reading this, trust no one." Determined to uncover the truth, Thomas began piecing together clues from the journal. He sought out old acquaintances of his mother, asking questions that made them visibly uncomfortable. Some refused to speak, slamming doors in his face, while others warned him to drop the matter altogether. Undeterred, he scoured libraries for information on the rituals mentioned in the journal, discovering references to ancient texts and obscure practices designed to cheat death. The deeper he dug, the clearer it became that Margaret's perfect preservation was no accident. It was the result of chemicals injected into her system during her final days. Someone had orchestrated this twisted experiment, and they had gone to great lengths to keep it hidden. Thomas's investigation took a toll on him, both physically and emotionally. Sleep eluded him, and paranoia crept into his thoughts. Shadows seemed to move when he wasn't looking, and whispers echoed in his ears late at night. Yet he pressed on, driven by a fierce determination to expose the truth. Slowly, connections emerged. He traced the funding for the experiments back to a prominent figure in the village, a man respected by many but feared by those who knew better. This man had exploited his wealth and influence to pursue immortality, using others as pawns in his quest. Margaret, unknowingly caught in his web, had become a victim of his ambition. As evidence mounted, Thomas knew he had to act. He compiled everything he had discovered: the journal, witness accounts, and documents linking the benefactor to the experiments, and presented it to the authorities. The revelation sent shockwaves through the community, forcing people to confront uncomfortable truths about power, greed, and morality. Arrests were made, and the benefactor's empire crumbled under the weight of scandal. For Thomas, the victory was bittersweet. While justice had been served, the cost of uncovering the truth weighed heavily on him. He mourned his mother once again, not just for her loss, but for the suffering she endured in silence. In the aftermath, the village returned to its peaceful ways, though the memory of Margaret lingered like a ghost. Her story served as a cautionary tale, reminding everyone of the dangers of unchecked ambition. Thomas vowed to honor her legacy by ensuring no one else suffered the same fate. He continued living in the village, quieter now, but with a renewed sense of purpose. The dreams stopped and the shadows faded, leaving him with a fragile peace. Though scars remained, he found solace in knowing that his mother's voice, silenced for so long, had finally been heard. The discovery of Margaret's perfectly preserved body and the mysterious journal sent shockwaves through the village, but for Thomas, it was only the beginning. As he sat alone in his dimly lit study, the leather-bound book resting on the table, before him his mind raced with questions. What had his mother been trying to tell him? Who were the shadowy figures she mentioned, and what role did they play in her death? The entries in the journal were fragmented, cryptic, and filled with fear, painting a picture of someone who knew too much and paid dearly for it. Determined to piece together the puzzle, Thomas began reading every word carefully, searching for clues that might lead him closer to the truth. Margaret's writings revealed a woman caught in a web far darker than anyone could have imagined. She described how, months before her illness, she had started experiencing strange phenomena, unexplained, noises in her home, fleeting glimpses of figures lurking just out of sight, and an overwhelming sense of being watched. At first, she dismissed these occurrences as figments of her imagination or signs of stress. But as the days passed, the incidents grew more frequent and intense. One entry stood out. "I heard them talking last night. They think I don't know, but I do. Something is happening to me, something unnatural, I'm afraid." Her words sent chills down Thomas's spine, filling him with both dread and resolve. As he delved deeper into the journal, Thomas uncovered references to a wealthy benefactor in the village, a man known for his philanthropy and influence. This benefactor had funded research into ancient rituals, promising breakthroughs in medicine and longevity. Margaret hinted that she had unknowingly become part of this project, subjected to experiments without her full understanding or consent. She wrote about injections administered under the guise of treatment, strange powders mixed into her food, and visits from doctors whose intentions seemed less than noble. "They say it's for my health," she wrote, "but I feel like I'm losing myself. My body isn't mine anymore." Thomas's heart ached as he read these lines, imagining his mother's confusion and fear. He couldn't help but wonder why she hadn't spoken up sooner, why she had kept all of this hidden. Then he realized it wasn't just fear that silenced her, it was trust. She had trusted the people around her, believing they had her best interests at heart. Instead, they had betrayed her, using her as a pawn in their twisted game. Anger bubbled inside Thomas, but he forced himself to stay focused. If he was going to uncover the truth, he needed evidence, hard facts that could expose those responsible. Armed with the journal, Thomas began investigating further. He visited old friends and acquaintances of his mother, asking pointed questions about her final days. Many were reluctant to talk, their faces pale with unease. Some claimed ignorance, while others outright refused to engage, slamming doors in his face. But a few offered fragments of information that hinted at a larger conspiracy. One elderly neighbor recalled seeing unfamiliar cars parked outside Margaret's house late at night. Another mentioned overhearing hushed conversations between her and a doctor, though the details remained vague. Each tidbit, no matter how small, added another piece to the puzzle. Thomas also scoured the local library, poring over dusty books and obscure texts in search of answers. He discovered references to ancient rituals designed to preserve life beyond its natural limits, practices steeped in mysticism and danger. These rituals often involved dangerous chemicals and invasive procedures, pushing the human body to its limits, and sometimes beyond. The descriptions matched what Margaret had written in her journal, confirming his suspicions. Someone in the village had been experimenting with these forbidden techniques, using unsuspecting individuals as test subjects, and Margaret, whether by chance or design, had become central to their plans. But the deeper Thomas dug, the more resistance he encountered. Anonymous notes appeared on his doorstep, warning him to stop his investigation. Strange men loitered near his house, watching his every move. Once he found his front door ajar, though nothing appeared to be missing. It was clear that someone didn't want him to find out the truth. Yet, each obstacle only strengthened his resolve. He installed extra locks on his doors, carried a flashlight everywhere, and avoided walking alone at night. Despite the risks, he pressed on, driven by a fierce determination to honor his mother's memory. One breakthrough came when Thomas stumbled upon an old newspaper clipping tucked inside the journal. It detailed a charity gala hosted by the wealthy benefactor, attended by prominent figures from across the region. Among the attendees was Dr. Evelyn Hart, a renowned scientist known for her groundbreaking work in biochemistry. Thomas recognized her name from one of Margaret's entries. She had referred to her as the woman with the cold eyes. Intrigued, Thomas decided to pay Dr. Hart a visit, hoping she might shed light on the experiments. Dr. Hart lived in a sprawling estate on the outskirts of the village, surrounded by high walls and security cameras. When Thomas arrived unannounced, he was met with hostility. The doctor denied any involvement in the experiments, dismissing his accusations as baseless paranoia. But there was something in her demeanor, a flicker of unease, a momentary hesitation that told Thomas otherwise. He left the estate empty-handed but more convinced than ever that he was on the right track. Back at home, Thomas pieced together the connections he had uncovered so far. The wealthy benefactor, the shadowy figures, the experiments, all of it pointed to a sinister plot orchestrated by powerful individuals who believed they were above morality. They had exploited Margaret's trust, using her as a guinea pig in their quest for immortality. Her perfect preservation wasn't a miracle. It was the result of chemicals injected into her system, altering her body in ways she never understood. And now, 5 years later, her story was finally coming to light. With mounting evidence in hand, Thomas approached the authorities, presenting them with the journal, witness accounts, and documents linking the benefactor to the experiments. At first, they were skeptical, dismissing his claims as the ramblings of a grieving son. But as he laid out the facts piece by painstaking piece, they began to take notice. An investigation was launched, uncovering a trail of corruption and deceit that reached far beyond the village. Arrests were made, secrets spilled, and the benefactor's empire crumbled under the weight of scandal. For the villagers, the revelations were both shocking and sobering. They had admired the benefactor, trusting him to improve their lives. Instead, he had used his wealth and influence to pursue selfish ambitions, leaving destruction in his wake. Margaret's story served as a stark reminder of the dangers of unchecked power and the lengths some would go to achieve their goals. For Thomas, the victory was bittersweet. While justice had been served, the cost of uncovering the truth weighed heavily on him. He mourned his mother once again, not just for her loss but for the suffering she endured in silence. In the months that followed, life in the village slowly returned to normal. The cemetery where Margaret was buried became a place of reflection, her grave marked by fresh flowers left by anonymous visitors. Thomas continued living in the same house, quieter now but with a renewed sense of purpose. The dreams stopped, and the shadows faded, leaving him with a fragile peace. Though scars remained, he found solace in knowing that his mother's voice, silenced for so long, had finally been heard. Her story would live on, not as a tragedy but as a testament to the strength of a son's love and the pursuit of truth against all odds. Thomas often thought about the lessons he had learned during his journey. He realized that sometimes the hardest truths are the ones we must face, even if they challenge everything we believe. He vowed to remain vigilant, to question authority, and to stand up for those who couldn't defend themselves. In honoring his mother's legacy, he hoped to create a world where such atrocities could never happen again. And though the road ahead was uncertain, he walked it with courage, knowing that he had done everything in his power to bring justice to the woman who had given him life. Thomas's investigation had taken him to the edge of exhaustion, but he refused to give up. The journal entries from his mother painted a chilling picture, and every new clue brought him closer to unraveling the sinister web that had ensnared her. Yet with each step forward, the stakes grew higher and the danger more palpable. He could feel eyes watching him everywhere, on the streets, in the shadows of trees, even in the reflection of shop windows. It was as if the entire village had turned against him, whispering warnings behind closed doors while pretending not to notice his presence. But Thomas knew better. Someone out there didn't want him digging any deeper, and they were willing to do whatever it took to stop him. One evening, after another long day of searching for answers, Thomas returned home to find his front door slightly ajar. His heart skipped a beat as he pushed it open, stepping cautiously into the dimly lit hallway. Everything appeared undisturbed at first glance, the furniture untouched, the curtains drawn, but something felt off. A faint smell lingered in the air, metallic and sharp, like blood. Panic gripped him as he moved through the house, checking every room. In the kitchen, he found a single red rose lying on the table, its petals still damp with dew. Beneath it was a note written in bold, jagged letters. "Stop now." The message sent chills down his spine. Whoever had left it hadn't bothered to hide their intrusion. This wasn't just a warning, it was a threat. Thomas clenched his fists, anger boiling beneath his skin. He couldn't let fear dictate his actions. If anything, this only solidified his resolve. Margaret's voice echoed in his mind, urging him to keep going, to uncover the truth no matter the cost. That night, he locked all the doors and windows, placed a baseball bat by his bedside, and stayed awake until dawn, listening for the slightest sound. The next morning, Thomas decided it was time to confront Dr. Evelyn Hart again. His previous visit had been met with hostility, but he sensed she was hiding something significant. This time he planned to be smarter, armed with questions that would leave her no room to evade the truth. Before heading to her estate, he stopped by the local library to gather more information about her background. What he discovered shocked him. Dr. Hart wasn't just a reputable scientist. She had a controversial past. Years ago, she had been involved in experimental research that pushed ethical boundaries, earning both acclaim and criticism. Some of her projects had been shut down due to safety concerns, yet she continued to receive funding from private sources. One name repeatedly appeared in connection with her work: Victor Langley, the wealthy benefactor tied to the rituals described in Margaret's journal. With this new knowledge, Thomas drove to Dr. Hart's estate, his hands gripping the steering wheel tightly. When he arrived, the gates were closed, guarded by two men in dark suits who looked more like bouncers than security personnel. They blocked his way, claiming the doctor was unavailable. But Thomas wasn't about to leave without answers. He shouted loud enough for anyone inside to hear, demanding to speak with Dr. Hart directly. Minutes later, she emerged, her expression cold and composed. She ushered him into her study, closing the door firmly behind them. "Why are you harassing me?" she demanded, her voice sharp. "I already told you I have nothing to do with your mother's death." Thomas stared at her, unflinching. "Then explain why my mother mentioned you in her journal. Why does your name keep coming up in connection with these experiments?" Dr. Hart hesitated, her composure faltering for a split second before she regained control. "Your mother was ill," she said finally. "We were trying to help her. Unfortunately, things didn't go as planned." Her words infuriated Thomas. "Help her? Is that what you call injecting her with chemicals and experimenting on her body? You turned her into some kind of science project." Dr. Hart sighed, rubbing her temples as though weary of the conversation. "You don't understand the bigger picture," she said quietly. "What we were doing, it wasn't just about your mother. It was about pushing the boundaries of human life, extending it beyond what nature intended. Yes, there were risks, but the potential rewards—" "Rewards?" Thomas interrupted, his voice rising. "For who? For rich people like Victor Langley who think they're gods? What about the victims, the ones who suffered because of your experiments? Did you ever stop to think about them?" Dr. Hart avoided his gaze, her silence speaking volumes. Thomas pressed on, determined to break through her defenses. "Tell me the truth. What exactly did you do to my mother, and how many others were part of this?" Dr. Hart stood abruptly, pacing the room as if wrestling with her conscience. Finally, she stopped, turning to face him. "Your mother volunteered," she admitted reluctantly. "She believed in our cause, trusted us to make a difference. We thought we could succeed where others had failed, to preserve life indefinitely. But the process, it was unstable. Most subjects didn't survive. Your mother was one of the few who showed promise. We thought we'd made a breakthrough." Her voice cracked, revealing a sliver of remorse. "But then, complications arose. By the time we realized what was happening, it was too late." Thomas listened in stunned silence, his mind reeling. Volunteered? His mother, a woman who valued simplicity and kindness above all else, had willingly subjected herself to such horrors. It didn't make sense. Unless she hadn't fully understood what she was agreeing to. The realization hit him like a punch to the gut. She had trusted these people, believing they had her best interests at heart. Instead, they had exploited her faith, using her as a pawn in their twisted quest for immortality. Determined to expose the full extent of their crimes, Thomas left Dr. Hart's estate and headed straight to the police station. Armed with the journal, witness statements, and the evidence he had gathered about Dr. Hart and Victor Langley, he pleaded his case once again. This time, the authorities listened. The weight of the evidence was undeniable, forcing them to launch a formal investigation. Officers raided Langley's properties, seizing documents and equipment linked to the experiments. Dr. Hart was taken into custody, her calm facade crumbling under interrogation. As the investigation unfolded, the scope of the conspiracy became horrifyingly clear. Dozens of individuals from across the region had been recruited, or coerced, into participating in the experiments. Many had died painful, unnatural deaths, their bodies unable to withstand the invasive procedures. Those who survived often experienced severe side effects, their health deteriorating rapidly. Victor Langley had funded the entire operation, driven by his obsession with cheating death. He saw himself as a visionary, destined to reshape humanity's future. But in reality, he was a monster, consumed by greed and arrogance. The revelations sent shockwaves through the village and beyond. People struggled to reconcile the man they had admired with the criminal now facing multiple charges. Families came forward, sharing stories of loved ones who had vanished or fallen mysteriously ill. Some mourned openly, while others demanded justice. For Thomas, the exposure of the truth brought a mix of emotions: relief, anger, and sorrow. He had uncovered the darkness that had claimed his mother, but the scars ran deep. He couldn't shake the image of her perfectly preserved body, a testament to the cruelty inflicted upon her. In the weeks that followed, the village began to heal, though the wounds remained raw. Memorials were held for the victims, their names etched onto plaques to ensure they would never be forgotten. Thomas visited Margaret's grave often, leaving flowers and speaking softly to her as if she could hear him. "I'm sorry I didn't see it sooner," he whispered one afternoon, tears streaming down his face. "I should have protected you. But I promise you this, I won't let them hurt anyone else." His determination led him to take action. Using the skills he had developed during his investigation, Thomas started advocating for stricter regulations on medical research and greater transparency in scientific practices. He gave interviews, wrote articles, and attended conferences, sharing his story to raise awareness about the dangers of unchecked ambition. His efforts gained traction, inspiring others to join the fight for accountability and ethics. Though the journey had been grueling, Thomas found a renewed sense of purpose. He realized that while he couldn't change the past, he could shape the future. Margaret's legacy lived on, not as a victim of exploitation, but as a symbol of resilience and justice. Her voice, once silenced, now echoed through the lives of those fighting for a better world. And Thomas, standing tall amidst the shadows of his own grief, vowed to carry her torch, ensuring that no one else would suffer the same fate. The exposure of Victor Langley's twisted experiments and the subsequent arrests sent ripples far beyond the quiet village where Thomas lived. News outlets picked up the story, turning it into a national sensation. Reporters flocked to the area, eager to interview anyone connected to the case. The villagers, once tight-lipped and wary, now found themselves thrust into the spotlight, their lives dissected by journalists and commentators alike. For Thomas, this newfound attention was both a blessing and a curse. On one hand, it amplified his message, bringing much-needed awareness to the dangers of unethical scientific practices. On the other hand, it reopened old wounds, forcing him to relive the pain of losing his mother over and over again. Every day brought new developments in the investigation. Documents seized from Langley's properties revealed a network of collaborators, scientists, doctors, and even government officials who had turned a blind eye to the atrocities committed in the name of progress. Dr. Evelyn Hart, despite her initial resistance, eventually broke down during questioning, implicating several high-profile figures in the conspiracy. Her testimony painted a chilling picture of ambition run amok, where morality took a back seat to the pursuit of immortality. "We thought we were doing something noble," she confessed bitterly. "But in the end we became what we feared most, monsters." Thomas watched as the trial unfolded, attending every hearing with a mix of anger and resolve. He listened intently as prosecutors laid out the evidence, detailing how Langley and his associates had manipulated vulnerable individuals, exploiting their trust for personal gain. Witnesses recounted harrowing stories of loved ones who had disappeared or died under mysterious circumstances. Families shattered by loss finally had a chance to confront those responsible, their voices trembling but resolute. Through it all, Thomas remained a steady presence, offering support to others while continuing to share his own story. Despite the overwhelming evidence against them, Langley and his co-conspirators fought fiercely to defend themselves. Their lawyers argued that the experiments, though controversial, had been conducted with the participants' consent, a claim Thomas knew to be false. Margaret's journal served as a powerful rebuttal, its pages filled with confusion and fear rather than informed agreement. When called to testify, Thomas read excerpts aloud in court, his voice steady despite the lump in his throat. "My mother didn't understand what she was agreeing to," he said firmly. "She trusted these people, believing they had her best interests at heart. Instead, they betrayed her in the worst possible way." The courtroom erupted in murmurs as Thomas spoke, his words striking a chord with everyone present. Even the judge seemed visibly moved, pausing briefly before urging him to continue. By the time he finished, there wasn't a dry eye in the room. The prosecution built on his testimony, presenting additional evidence that left little doubt about the defendant's guilt. Yet as the trial dragged on, Thomas began to feel the weight of everything he had endured. Sleepless nights, constant vigilance, and the emotional toll of revisiting his mother's death had taken their toll. He looked gaunt, his eyes hollow, but he refused to give up, not when he was so close to seeing justice served. Outside the courthouse, public opinion swayed heavily in favor of accountability. Protesters gathered daily, holding signs that demanded transparency and ethical standards in medical research. Social media buzzed with hashtags calling for reform, amplifying the voices of victims' families and advocates like Thomas. Celebrities and influencers joined the conversation, using their platforms to highlight the dangers of unchecked ambition in science. It was a movement born out of tragedy, yet fueled by hope, a collective cry for change that resonated across the nation. As the weeks passed, Thomas found himself becoming more than just a grieving son seeking justice. He became a symbol of resilience, a voice for those who had none. People approached him after hearings, sharing their own stories of loss and betrayal. Some sought advice, asking how they could protect themselves or their loved ones from similar exploitation. Others simply wanted to thank him for standing up against powerful forces that had long operated in secrecy. Each interaction reminded Thomas why he had embarked on this journey in the first place, to ensure no one else suffered. The same fate as his mother. To cope with the mounting pressure, Thomas leaned on the support of friends and allies who had rallied around him. Sarah, a local journalist who had covered the case from the beginning, became a close confidant. She helped him navigate the complexities of media scrutiny, ensuring his message remained clear and impactful. Father O'Connell, the priest who had initially dismissed Thomas's demand to dig up his mother's grave, offered spiritual guidance, reminding him to find moments of peace amidst the chaos. And then there were the villagers, many of whom had come to admire Thomas's courage and determination. They invited him to dinners, checked in on him regularly, and stood by him during the darkest days of the trial. By the time the verdict was announced, tensions had reached a fever pitch. The courtroom was packed with reporters jostling for space and cameras capturing every moment. As the judge delivered the final decision, guilty on all counts, a wave of relief washed over Thomas. Justice had been served, not just for him, but for everyone affected by Langley's crimes. Cheers erupted outside the courthouse, mingling with tears of joy and sorrow. For the first time in years, Thomas allowed himself to breathe freely, the burden of his quest lifting slightly from his shoulders. But even as the celebrations continued, Thomas knew the work wasn't over. While the trial had exposed the truth, systemic issues remained. Unethical practices still existed in labs and institutions around the world, hidden behind closed doors and protected by powerful interests. Determined to make lasting change, Thomas expanded his advocacy efforts, working tirelessly to push for stricter regulations and greater oversight in medical research. He collaborated with lawmakers, drafted petitions, and organized workshops to educate the public about the importance of ethics in science. His efforts gained traction, inspiring a new generation of activists to join the cause. Through it all, Thomas never forgot his mother. He kept her journal close, rereading her entries whenever he needed strength or clarity. Her words reminded him of why he had started this journey, to honor her memory and prevent others from enduring the same suffering. In quiet moments, he visited her grave, speaking softly as if she could hear him. "You'd be proud of me, Mom," he said one evening, kneeling beside the headstone. "I'm doing everything I can to make sure no one else gets hurt." Life in the village slowly returned to normal, though it would never be the same. The cemetery where Margaret was buried became a place of reflection, its paths lined with flowers left by anonymous visitors paying tribute to the victims. Conversations about the case lingered, serving as a reminder of the fragility of trust and the importance of accountability. For Thomas, the experience had transformed him in ways he couldn't have imagined. He had started as a grieving son desperate for answers, but he emerged as a champion for justice, driven by love and purpose. In the months that followed, Thomas received letters from strangers thanking him for his bravery and dedication. Some shared stories of their own struggles, finding solace in knowing they weren't alone. Others expressed admiration for his unwavering commitment to exposing the truth. Each letter reinforced his belief that change was possible, that even in the face of overwhelming odds, one person could make a difference. He responded to as many as he could, offering words of encouragement and gratitude. Though scars remained, Thomas found peace in knowing that his mother's legacy lived on. Her story had sparked a movement, shining a light on the dark corners of human ambition and demanding better from those entrusted with power. For Thomas, that was enough. He continued living in the village, quieter now, but with a renewed sense of purpose. The dreams stopped and the shadows faded, leaving him with a fragile but enduring peace. And as he walked through the streets, greeted warmly by neighbors and friends, he carried Margaret's spirit with him, a beacon of hope, guiding him forward into a brighter future. As the dust settled from the trial and the world moved on, Thomas found himself at a crossroads. The victory had been hard won, but it came with a price he hadn't fully anticipated: the weight of being a public figure. His face was now recognized. Beyond the village, his name synonymous with resilience and justice. People looked to him for answers, for guidance, even for inspiration. While part of him felt honored, another part longed for the simplicity of his old life. The quiet evenings, spent reading by the fire, the solitary walks through the woods, the unbroken silence that once surrounded him. But Thomas knew there was no going back. Margaret's story had become bigger than just her or him. It belonged to everyone who had ever felt powerless against forces they couldn't control. One morning, as sunlight streamed through the cracks in his curtains, Thomas sat at his kitchen table staring at a blank notebook. He had decided to write a book, a memoir chronicling his journey from the moment he first suspected something was wrong to the day the verdict was announced. It wasn't an easy decision. Writing meant revisiting memories he had tried so hard to compartmentalize, reliving moments of fear, anger, and despair. Yet deep down he knew it was necessary. If he could put his pain into words, maybe others would find strength in them. Maybe someone else grappling with loss or injustice would see themselves in his story and realize they weren't alone. The process of writing proved cathartic, yet exhausting. Each chapter forced Thomas to confront emotions he thought he had buried. Describing the night he discovered his mother's perfectly preserved body brought tears to his eyes, while recounting the threats he received during his investigation sent shivers down his spine. But there were also moments of light, memories of Margaret's kindness, the unwavering support of friends, and the small victories along the way that kept him going. As the pages filled, Thomas began to see his journey not just as a quest for justice, but as a testament to the power of love and determination. When the manuscript was finally complete, Thomas hesitated before sending it off to publishers. Doubts crept in. What if people didn't care? What if they dismissed his story as sensationalism? But Sarah, the journalist who had stood by him throughout the trial, encouraged him to take the leap. "This isn't just your story," she reminded him. "It's a mirror reflecting what happens when greed overrides humanity. People need to hear it." With her words echoing in his mind, Thomas submitted the manuscript, bracing himself for whatever came next. To his surprise, the response was overwhelmingly positive. Publishers clamored to work with him, recognizing the potential impact of his story. Within months, the book hit shelves, quickly climbing bestseller lists and sparking widespread discussion. Readers connected with its raw honesty, praising Thomas for his courage in sharing such a deeply personal narrative. Bookstores hosted signings where lines stretched out the door, and strangers approached him with tears in their eyes, thanking him for giving voice to their own struggles. For the first time, Thomas felt like he was making a tangible difference, not just in policy or legislation, but in individual lives. The success of the book opened doors Thomas never imagined. Invitations poured in from universities, conferences, and advocacy groups eager to hear him speak. At first, he declined most of them, hesitant to step too far outside his comfort zone. But eventually, curiosity got the better of him, and he accepted a few offers. Standing on stage, microphone in hand, he shared his story with audiences ranging from students to seasoned professionals. He spoke about the importance of questioning authority, the dangers of unchecked ambition, and the responsibility each person has to stand up for what is right. His speeches resonated deeply, earning standing ovations and heartfelt applause. Despite the accolades, Thomas remained grounded. He returned home after each event, retreating to the solitude of his house, where he could reflect without distraction. The attention still unnerved him at times, especially when strangers stopped him on the street or asked for selfies. But he reminded himself why he was doing this: for Margaret, for the victims, and for anyone who might one day face a similar struggle. That purpose anchored him, keeping him focused even when the pressure threatened to overwhelm him. Back in May, the village life continued to evolve. The cemetery where Margaret was buried became a place of pilgrimage, drawing visitors from across the country. Some came to pay respects, leaving flowers and notes beside her grave. Others sought solace, finding comfort in the knowledge that her story had inspired change. The villagers took pride in knowing their community had played a role in exposing such a significant injustice. They often invited Thomas to gatherings, celebrating his achievements while reminding him that he was still one of them, a son of the soil shaped by the same hills and rivers that defined them all. Yet amidst the praise and recognition, Thomas couldn't ignore the lingering sense of loss. No matter how much progress he made, no matter how many lives he touched, nothing could bring Margaret back. There were nights when he lay awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering what she would think of everything that had happened. Would she be proud of him? Or would she wish he had let her rest in peace instead of digging up the past? These questions haunted him, though he tried not to dwell on them. Instead, he channeled his energy into continuing her legacy, ensuring her sacrifice hadn't been in vain. One of Thomas's proudest accomplishments came when legislation inspired by his advocacy was passed. Known as the Ethical Research Accountability Act, it introduced stricter regulations for medical experiments, requiring full transparency and informed consent from participants. The law was hailed as a landmark achievement, praised by scientists, ethicists, and activists alike. When Thomas attended the signing ceremony, standing beside lawmakers and fellow advocates, he felt a surge of pride. This was real change, the kind that would protect countless lives in the future. As cameras flashed and reporters shouted questions, he allowed himself a rare smile, knowing Margaret would have approved. But even as he celebrated these victories, Thomas remained vigilant. He knew laws alone couldn't eradicate corruption or prevent abuses of power. Change required constant effort, a collective commitment to holding institutions accountable. To that end, he founded an organization dedicated to monitoring research practices and supporting victims of unethical experiments. Named after Margaret, the foundation provided resources, legal aid, and a platform for those seeking justice. Its launch marked a new chapter in Thomas's journey, one focused not just on exposing wrongdoing but on fostering a culture of integrity and compassion. Through it all, Thomas clung to the lessons he had learned along the way. He understood, now that truth rarely revealed itself easily. It hid in shadows, whispered in fragments, and demanded persistence to uncover. He also realized that no one could fight battles like these alone. Every step forward had been possible because of the people who believed in him, who offered their time, skills, and encouragement when he needed it most. Gratitude became a cornerstone of his life, guiding his actions and interactions. As the years passed, Thomas grew older, his hair streaked with gray and his movements slower than before. Yet, his spirit remained undiminished. He continued speaking, writing, and advocating, driven by the belief that even small actions could create ripples of change. His home remained a sanctuary filled with books, photographs, and mementos from his journey. Among them was Margaret's journal, carefully preserved in a glass case, a reminder of where it all began. On quiet evenings, Thomas would sit by the window, watching the sun dip below the horizon. He thought about how far he had come, from a grieving son desperate for answers to a man whose voice reached thousands. He thought about Margaret, imagining her smiling down on him, proud of the life he had built in her honor. And he thought about the future, hopeful that his efforts would pave the way for a world where tragedies like hers would never happen again. Though scars remained, he carried them with grace, knowing they were proof of a life lived with purpose. As Thomas grew older, his days took on a rhythm of reflection and action. The village where he lived remained a comforting constant, its familiar streets and faces grounding him even as the world around him changed. He continued to work tirelessly for his foundation, ensuring that it stayed true to its mission of protecting vulnerable individuals from unethical practices. Yet there were moments when he allowed himself to pause, to sit quietly and let the memories wash over him. These moments were bittersweet, filled with both pride in what he had achieved and sorrow for the mother he had lost. One crisp autumn morning, Thomas received a letter that stopped him in his tracks. It was from a young woman named Emily, who wrote to thank him for saving her life. She explained that she had been unknowingly recruited into a clinical trial disguised as a legitimate medical study. When strange symptoms began to appear, she turned to Thomas's foundation for help. Thanks to their intervention, the truth came to light. The trial was part of an illegal operation tied to remnants of Victor Langley's network. Emily's story reminded Thomas that while much progress had been made, the fight against exploitation was far from over. Her gratitude, expressed in heartfelt words, reignited his determination to keep pushing forward. Inspired by Emily's letter, Thomas decided to organize a nationwide campaign aimed at raising awareness about predatory research practices. He partnered with schools, universities, and community centers to host workshops and seminars. These events weren't just lectures, they were interactive sessions designed to empower people with knowledge. Participants learned how to identify red flags, ask the right questions, and advocate for themselves or their loved ones. The response was overwhelming. Parents brought their children, students came in groups, and elderly individuals shared stories of past encounters with unscrupulous doctors. Each session ended with a standing ovation, followed by long lines of people eager to speak with Thomas personally. The campaign gained momentum, drawing attention not only within the country but internationally as well. News outlets covered the initiative extensively, highlighting its impact on communities and calling for similar efforts worldwide. Thomas traveled extensively during this period, delivering keynote speeches at global conferences and meeting with policymakers to discuss ways to strengthen ethical standards. Despite the grueling schedule, he found joy in connecting with others who shared his vision. Their enthusiasm fueled him, reminding him that change was possible when people worked together. Back home, The villagers celebrated Thomas's achievements with a special ceremony held in the town square. A plaque was unveiled in his honor, inscribed with words that captured the essence of his journey: for courage in seeking truth and dedication to justice. As Thomas stood before the crowd, listening to speeches praising his contributions, he felt humbled. This wasn't just recognition of his efforts. It was acknowledgement of Margaret's sacrifice and the countless lives touched by her legacy. When it was his turn to speak, he thanked everyone simply, emphasizing that the real heroes were those who refused to stay silent in the face of injustice. In the years that followed, Thomas focused more on mentoring younger activists, passing on the lessons he had learned. He believed deeply in the importance of nurturing the next generation of leaders, equipping them with tools to challenge corruption and champion ethical practices. His home became a hub for these young minds, filled with lively debates, brainstorming sessions, and shared meals. Some went on to establish their own organizations, while others pursued careers in law, medicine, and journalism. Regardless of their paths, they carried with them the values instilled by Thomas: integrity, empathy, and resilience. Despite his age, Thomas never lost his curiosity or passion for learning. He spent hours reading books, articles, and research papers, staying informed about advancements in science and technology. He understood that innovation could bring tremendous benefits, but it also carried risks if misused. By keeping abreast of developments, he hoped to anticipate potential challenges and address them proactively. His ability to adapt and evolve earned him respect not only among peers, but also among younger generations who saw him as a bridge between tradition and modernity. On quieter days, Thomas returned to the cemetery to visit Margaret's grave. Over time, the once sparse path leading to her resting place had transformed into a vibrant garden, maintained by volunteers inspired by her story. Flowers bloomed year-round, their colors brightening even the dreariest winter mornings. Notes left by visitors fluttered gently in the breeze, each bearing messages of gratitude, hope, or solidarity. Thomas often sat there for hours, talking softly as though Margaret were sitting beside him. Sometimes he shared updates about his work. Other times he simply reminisced about happier days. In those moments, the weight of everything he had endured seemed lighter, replaced by a profound sense of connection. As Thomas approached his later years, he began thinking about how he wanted to be remembered. Fame and accolades no longer mattered to him. What mattered was the difference he had made. He drafted a will, leaving instructions for his belongings to be donated to causes close to his heart. His house was to become a resource center for victims of unethical practices, staffed by volunteers trained to offer support and guidance. All proceeds from his book sales would fund scholarships for students pursuing careers in ethics and advocacy. And Margaret's journal, now considered a historical artifact, was to be preserved in a museum dedicated to human rights. When Thomas passed away peacefully one spring evening, surrounded by friends and admirers, the entire village mourned. Flags flew at half-mast and shops closed early as residents gathered in the square to pay tribute. The funeral procession stretched for miles, led by Sarah, Father O'Connell, and Emily, whose life Thomas had saved. At the cemetery, they laid him to rest beside Margaret, their graves separated only by a narrow strip of earth. A simple headstone marked his final resting place, engraved with a single sentence: "A son's love changed the world." Years later, the foundation Thomas had built continued to thrive, expanding its reach across continents. Stories of its impact were told and retold, inspiring new waves of activism. Students studied Thomas's memoirs in classrooms, dissecting his strategies and philosophies. Artists created paintings, poems, and songs celebrating his courage and compassion. His name became synonymous with integrity, echoing through generations, as a reminder of what one person could achieve with unwavering resolve. And so Thomas's legacy endured, not just in laws or institutions, but in hearts and minds. He had started as a grieving son seeking answers, driven by love for his mother. Along the way, he had uncovered truths that challenged the world, sparked movements that reshaped society, and inspired countless individuals to stand up for what was right. But perhaps his greatest achievement was proving that even in darkness, light could prevail, that a single voice, raised with conviction, could ignite change capable of transforming lives forever.